ready to go.
Okay. I was like, oh no, not the audio. Okay, so we have about 12 people here, so that's actually a good turnout for us.
Great.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Melissa Easton. I'm head of special collections here at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. If you're not familiar with our department, we're located on the second floor of the library upstairs. We're a two-sided department. We are genealogy in the front and archives in the back. It's like a history mullet kind of thing. We do a lot of programming like this. This is our third Wednesday lecture. We do history lectures on the third Wednesday of the month. This is actually our last one for the year. I don't believe we have anybody in November or December just because of the way the holidays fall. So look for our new programming lineup coming in January. We've got a lot of exciting things coming next year. A lot of really interesting authors, creators, and historians coming up. The genealogy side of our department, if you are itching to come and be involved in something at the library, we put on monthly genealogy classes that teach you how to do different aspects of genealogical and historical research, starting from just basically learning how to do a family tree to navigating things like maps and land records, adoption records, becoming familiar with how to read censuses and so on. So we've got a lot of handouts on the table that explain more about what's going on. You can always find what kind of programming we have coming up in the library in the source newsletter, which is also available on the back table. If you have time tonight, another fun thing that our department does is we have lots of displays. We rotate our displays every 6 to 8 weeks. Right now we have 2.5 displays up. One, we've got the history of audio recording, where we've gone through all of our collections and found all the different kinds of formats that you can record audio onto. So we start with the Edison wax cylinders, and then we go through to MP3 sound files. So it's a really fun little thing. And then we've got another couple of little cases that are important buildings that Baton Rouge has, in its wisdom, chosen to demolish. We've got a great exhibit on the Union Tank Car Dome, which was the largest Buckminster Fuller Dome in the world until it was demolished in 2007. And then we've got one on the Paramount Theater, which was a wonderful old 1920s Columbia Theater that was also demolished. But we are not here to talk about those buildings. We are here today to talk about other wonderful buildings. Today we have author, photographer, and architectural historian Dale Carlson. He was born and raised along the northeastern shores of Lake Michigan, where as an adolescent, he developed a fascination with the city of Detroit. Through the 1990s, Mr. Carlson studied art, journalism, and graphic design at 4 Michigan colleges, including Michigan State University, while simultaneously migrating closer and closer to the Detroit metro area. In 2004, he made Southeast Oakland County his permanent home, and in 2019, he earned an associate degree in photographic technology from Oakland Community College. He serves on the City of Berkeley, Michigan's Historical Committee, and is the author of Corrado Parducci, a field guide to Detroit's architectural sculptor. His latest project, Kahn's Detroit, a field guide to Albert Kahn's design of the metro area, will showcase 300 extant Kahn designs in Southeast Michigan and be published in the next few months. Mr. Carlson will also publish a field guide to stained glass of the New Orleans metropolis in late 2021, and he calls the city his second home. He credits his late wife, Carolyn Venegas Jones, whom he married in 2014, for inspiring his ventures into publishing and photography. Please give him a warm welcome. All right, Dale.
Thank you very much, Melissa. I appreciate you and the library staff inviting me to present tonight. And I'd like to give you a special thank you for taking the time to arrange the technical aspects of our presentation this evening. My name is Dale Allen Carlson, and I am the co-author of a book entitled Corrado Parducci, a field guide to Detroit's architectural sculptor. It's kind of hard to see with the blue a green screen there, but I'll show you an image of it later. And I've been invited to talk tonight for about an hour for about a subject that's really important to me. A sculptor that worked in the Detroit area from about 1924 to 1980 by the name of Corrado Giuseppe Parducci. I will start my lecture this evening telling you a little bit about myself and how I got so deeply into these type of studies. I'm going to follow that up with a little bit of a biography of Corrado and his brother Rudolph, and explain to you why their experiences are pertinent to the state of Louisiana. They executed quite a few commissions in your area, and they both worked on the state capitol in Baton Rouge. After we go through a bio of the brothers, I will show you a handful of commissions here in the Detroit area and Michigan and the Midwest that they built their reputations on. And then after looking at those, we'll look at a handful in Louisiana, and we will culminate with the Capitol, the most interesting subject that they worked on in Louisiana. And then I'll show you a few in various areas of the United States on the far western and eastern shores and in Chicago that I think you'll also find of interest also. And we can have a little Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. So let me get started with myself. I first started getting interested in Detroit architectural history in my college years. I was born and raised in a smaller town in the northern reaches of Michigan, and I went to college at Michigan State University, which is in a significantly larger metro area, Lansing, where the state capital of Michigan is located. And during these years in college, I had a great interest in techno and house music, and that kind of music originated in Detroit and Chicago. And I would pretty much drive to Detroit every weekend I could for about 5 years straight to take in the live music scenes that were showcasing that style of music. Well, when you grow up in northern Michigan and you visit Detroit regularly, one of the biggest differences you notice immediately is the epic size of the constructions and how much larger the architecture is. And that's something I definitely took notice of. In 1993, on one of my weekend excursions to Detroit, I ran into a friend that I grew up with in Traverse City, and he recommended to me that I take a tour of the Guardian building in downtown Detroit. This is a place I had never heard of until he recommended I take this tour. And come to find out, the Guardian building is one of the most important skyscrapers in the evolution of the American skyscraper. And Parducci also has some work on the front of it. The very next year, I purchased for my mother a birthday present, a book about architecture in Michigan. It's called Buildings of Michigan. It's by a woman named Catherine Bishop Eckert, who is a former state historic preservation officer here in Michigan. And I gifted it to my mother, immediately borrowed it from her, and I've owned it for the last 28 years. And I pretty much take it with me everywhere I travel in Michigan, which is a lot of places. And it's a pretty encyclopedic, so I haven't covered it all, but you know, pretty much any town I go to that's covered in the book, I try to hunt down what Catherine Bishop Eckert has to say about its architecture. And also, this is the first book where I was exposed to the name of Parducci. So Catherine Bishop Eckert has been a huge influence on my development as an architectural historian. We're going to fast forward to about 2007 now. And by this point, I'm living in suburban Detroit, and I purchased my first digital camera. And the first thing I start doing with my new digital camera is driving around Detroit and taking pictures of all my favorite buildings, posting them on Facebook, accompanied by histories that I would compile from a variety of sources. It only took a few months of doing this for quite a few friends to recommend to me that I come up with a better avenue for sharing my Detroit architectural history studies. And in 2011, I launched a website with the help of friends called ilovedetroitmichigan.com. It's still active today, but it's in desperate need of an update. Some of the older articles don't look that great. In any case, it only took a few months of working on this website before I started to be contacted by other local architectural historians in Detroit who had additional information and corrections, all kinds of things to offer. And some of them just wanted to start correspondences, you know, with a person that had similar interests. One of these people was my co-author, Einar E. Kavarin. Einar is of Icelandic descent, which accounts for his rare name. And Einar, after a few months of correspondence, reveals to me that in the 1990s, he hunted down a son of Corrado Parducci And his son was living in suburban Los Angeles, in Los Angeles, in a neighborhood in Los Angeles, retired from a professorship at UCLA. Einar met him personally, and Alan allowed Einar to photocopy his father's original studio ledgers that enumerate over 600 commissions, as well as a scrapbook that included approximately 700 scrapbook images of models that Parducci created in his studio over the course of his career. Let me push play so that we can start advancing the show here, and you can take a look at his ledgers there. So there's Parducci's ledgers, and once Einar revealed to me that he had photocopies of these ledgers in his possession, I immediately thought to myself, I want to write a book about this. Parducci is frequently cited in the annals of Detroit architectural history, and the amazing number of commissions he undertook is often cited, the number most frequently given, 600 plus, but no one had ever made an attempt to enumerate as many Parducci commissions as they could find. And that was my goal with the book, and I've hunted down over 300. So Einar revealed this to me in approximately 2013, and I went to work on it right at that time, but I ran into quite a few road bumps that prevented me from publishing until 2020. The first road bump was, this is my first book, and I self-published it, and there was an absolutely ton to learn about writing a book and publishing it properly, so that took a lot of time. Also, my late wife, Carolyn Benegas Jones, became ill with a terminal form of cancer in 2014, and I dropped the project to care for her for 16 months from diagnosis to her passing away in 2015. I took the project back up shortly after she passed away, and around 2018, I felt ready to publish as far as the text of the book went, but I didn't feel confident about the photography. And I decided at that time that the photography needed to be better. And I very hesitantly enrolled in the photography program at Oakland Community College, not at all confident that they could improve my shooting because I'd been doing it for close to 10 years at that point. And I was 100% wrong about that. They made me into a 20 times better photographer in a matter of months. And they made me about a 50 times better photographer over the course of my experience there. And I credit the vast majority of my skill with a camera to what I learned at Oakland Community College from their staff. So I finished the program there in 2019. I got my associate's degree, and I published the book very shortly thereafter in January of 2020. And I published a second edition in just a few months after that, that added a few extra commissions and expanded the bibliography greatly. So that's how the book got out there. And that's how I got into architectural history. Let's talk about our subject now, Corrado Joseph Parducci. We're going to go backwards a little so you can look at his birth certificate here, issued by the municipality of Buti, Italy. This is a small mountain town about 10 miles west of Pisa, where the famous Leaning Tower is. Parducci's born here in the year 1900. You can see a few images of it here in the present day on the left, and on the right, you see a few images that are straight from Parducci's scrapbook. He's got a biographical section of it. And we can see from the campanile in the middle of town that it has changed not all that much in the century since these photos were taken. Parducci and his father immigrate to New York City by transatlantic ship in 1904. And the rest of the family follows them in 1906. And when they arrive in New York City, they settle in the Greenwich Village neighborhood in very close proximity to Washington Square Park and also McDougal Alley. And this is a really fortunate circumstance for the Parducci brothers, because at this time, McDougal Alley is essentially the center of American sculpture culture, where architectural and monumental sculpture are regarded. Some of the famous sculptors living and working in this area at the time include Augustus St. Gaudens, Daniel Chester French, who sculpted the Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial, Adolph Weinman, Paul Manship, Carl Bitter, and this is just a tip of the iceberg. There's many more obscure, lesser known sculptors working out of this area at this time. So the typical trajectory for an Italian immigrant in this area of New York at this time, life trajectory, is to finish New York City public schools around the age of 15 and go into factory work. Well, Rudolph and Corrado are diverted from this typical trajectory, mainly by the interference, or the interference isn't the right word, but mainly through the actions of a woman by the name of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney is a socialite. She's rich and famous. She's followed a lot in the press, and she's also an accomplished sculptor in her own right. And she's a very progressive woman that makes a habit of visiting New York City public schools and asking instructors for the names of students that have aptitudes in the arts. And Corrado, she's given Corrado's name. Corrado attests in a 1975 Smithsonian interview. And we suspect also that Rudolph is probably given, his name is given also, but that's not as easily supportable by evidence as Corrado. In any case, Mrs. Whitney, I forgot to mention, she's also connected to the very famous Vanderbilt family line that includes Anderson Cooper and Gloria Vanderbilt, the famous fashion designer, just to give you an idea of her fame at the time. She asks Corrado's parents for permission for Corrado to attend classes at a nearby settlement house. This is when he's 8 years old. And Corrado's parents give permission. A settlement house, just for the record, is pretty much a community center that is focused on assimilating newly arrived immigrants. And Corrado states in his 1975 interview that at the age of 8, his very first instructor is a guy by the name of Albin Polasek. Well, Albin Polasek goes on to direct the sculpture department of the Chicago Institute of Arts for approximately 30 years and achieves his own level of fame. And I'd like you to remember his name because we're going to touch on him again later in the lecture. But this just gives you an idea of what kind of world-class instruction Corrado and likely Rudolph are receiving at an extremely young age, which makes their skill in sculpture highly advanced compared to their peers in later educational environments, and serves them very well later into their successful careers as architectural sculptors. Here we see them in the basement of a New York City public school circa 1915. I hope my avatar isn't covering up the date there. But you'll also notice from the caption at the bottom that Rudolph is in this class. And this is one of many clues that inform us that Rudolph most likely shared the exact same educational experience as Corrado, excuse me. So after they graduate public schools in New York City, both Rudolph and Corrado attend the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design in Manhattan and the Art Students League in Manhattan. And these are both exceedingly influential art schools of their time. There's a lot of really influential educators, as well as people that are involved in architectural arts in New York City. The Beaux-Arts Institute is specifically geared to architectural arts as opposed to fine arts and gallery display. And one of their founding members is Lloyd Warren, who's the brother of Whitney Warren, a namesake in the famous New York firm of Warren and Wetmore. So Parducci, Corrado, and Rudolph, they get world-class instruction at both of these schools. And in addition to that, Corrado takes on his first apprenticeship in 1917 with a gentleman by the name of Ulysses Ricci. Ricci is already a very accomplished sculptor at this point. We can see the apprenticeship agreement here in the lower left. If you look very closely, you'll see Ricci's signature, Parducci's signature, and his father, Julius. Ricci is executing commissions for some of the most important architectural firms in New York City at the time, including Cass Gilbert, McKim, Mead and White, Carrera and Hastings, Warren and Wetmore, as I mentioned before, York and Sawyer, and a number of others. And Corrado is very fortunate to get his foot in the door here at the very young age of 17, which is, again, like his classes as an 8-year-old, just really super early to be this deeply involved and influential people in the scene. Also around the exact same time, the city of Detroit is experiencing a massive building boom and is one of the fastest growing cities in America. And its most successful, prolific architect at that time, maybe a guy you've heard of before, Albert Kahn. He's visiting New York City regularly, He is visiting New York City regularly to confer with clients, money men, but most importantly, architectural sculptors that are rendering sculpture for some of his buildings here in Detroit and other sites. In his 1975 interview with the Smithsonian, Corrado states, Kahn got interested in me and he started to give DiLorenzo contracts, providing that I should do it. So here we see that Parducci is actually executing sculpture for the city of Detroit and other locations before he even moves to Detroit. Who is DiLorenzo, you might ask? Well, at this time, Ricci has essentially a revolving door of partners, and they keep changing while Parducci is working in his offices. Before he arrives, Ricci works for his uncle, Alessio, and we can see an ad from the New York Times in 1913 for his company. He's associated with John Donnelly, who's significantly more famous than he is at this point. Also, by 1918, we can see that Ricci, Ulysses, has separated from his uncle and opened his own studio with a man named Angelo Zari. By 1921, on the right, we see that his firm's partnership has changed to Ricci, Ardolino, and DiLorenzo. And by 1924, on the lower left, he's back with Zari again. And these are exactly the kind of revolving door partnerships that Parducci describes in his 1975 interview with the Smithsonian. So around 1920, 1921 is when DiLorenzo and Ricci split corporately for the last time. And Parducci at this point is faced with the decision, do I go on with Ricci or do I join DiLorenzo's studio? Well, Ricci is a specialist in figurative and anatomical work, meaning that he sculpts human beings and he sculpts animals a lot. DiLorenzo is more of an ornamentalist. He makes the trim around those major sculptures. He does like vines and foliage and column capitals, things that don't involve as much a human and animal anatomy. And the figural and anatomical work, it's a little bit more prestigious, and Parducci is more interested in it. And he reasons that if he goes with DiLorenzo, he's going to get assigned most of the figural work in his commissions. And he's right about that. And over the course of 1921 to say 1923, he becomes one of DiLorenzo's top assistants. In 1924, an architectural firm here in Detroit, according to Parducci's 1975 interview recollections, insists that DiLorenzo or one of his agents be in town in Detroit for the completion of one of their commissions. And DiLorenzo decides to send Parducci. And Parducci doesn't know it when he comes out here, but he's essentially opening a franchise office for DiLorenzo in Detroit. He gets out to Detroit. He's absolutely inundated with work. He can't even come home to New York to get his wife, and he asks somebody else to drive her out to Detroit. And they permanently settle there because it doesn't take long for Parducci to realize, hey, if I separate from DiLorenzo, I've got my entire own career awaiting me here. And that's what he does. After about a year of running a franchise for DiLorenzo, in August of 1925, he buys out DiLorenzo for $5,000 and takes over every contract they have going in the city at that point. And that starts a 55-year run for Parducci in the city of Detroit. Let's talk about his brother a little bit, though, because his brother is more closely connected to Louisiana. And Rudolph has a similar life trajectory in the early years. When Corrado heads to Detroit in the mid-20s, Rudolph heads to New Orleans for about 5 years, and his presence there is confirmed by numerous Swords New Orleans City Directory entries. And if you look closely at this one on the left, you'll see that he's employed by lligh and Company. John Marion lligh is the sculptor that he collaborated with on the works of his that ended up on the Louisiana Capitol. If you look closely at the Detroit entry, you'll see that he's corporately connected with his brother in Detroit from 29 to 1935. And then from 1935 on till his passing away, he lives in a few different locations in metropolitan Los Angeles, where he also experiences quite a great level of success. We'll touch upon it later. Well, interestingly and awesomely, of all the places Rudolph lived, he is talked about the most in the Louisiana press. And we have 3 separate clippings here that talk a lot about him. The first, well, chronologically, the first is actually his wife, Deborah, who he meets in New Orleans in approximately 1926 and is married to her approximately around that year. And she manages to get her picture in the paper in 1926, shortly after graduating from a social work program at Tulane. So that's really unique. That was kind of an unexpected surprise. Also in 1932, in the Baton Rouge State Times Morning Advocate, there's very thorough descriptions of the work that's been done on the Capitol by sculptors from all over the nation. And in describing the work, they also give short biographies of the sculptors, and Rudolph gets a pretty detailed one here that actually tells us about half of the work we know of by Rudolph. Also, you'll note that it mentions he works at, that he studies at the Art Student League and Beaux-Arts Institute in Manhattan, just as Parducci did. Finally, in 1979, there's an article about the lligh family, who had plenty of descendants that stayed in architecture and architectural sculpture, and it talks a little bit about Rudolph's involvement with lligh at that time, including work on the Sanger Theater and the Senate chamber of the Louisiana Capitol. So we're going to touch upon some commissions by Rudolph and Corrado now, starting in Michigan. But before I go forward, a really important point I need to make is that Rudolph and Corrado are primarily clay and plaster modelers. They're not the kind of guys that show up at the building to carve the stone. That's a different artist. And usually that artist works from the models of a modeler like Corrado and Rudolph. So the carver's name tends to fade into obscurity more commonly than the artist who comes up with the original idea, even though they are a super talented artisan in their own right. So just keep in mind that the Parducci brothers, they don't show up to do carving. They make clay models in their studio. Also plaster models. There is an exception to this rule, though, and that is decorative crown moldings and decorative plasters that you see at fancy constructions, usually around light fixtures or where the wall meets the ceiling. And Parducci's, they do a lot of these over the course of their career. And in these cases, if they're creating a plaster pattern, they generally show up long enough to create a duplicable portion of the pattern. And then a larger plastering company comes in with multiple trained staff members who are expert at perfectly reproducing the pattern. And they can get, a huge room done in one day that way. If the person who comes up with the original idea has to do the entire plaster, it's a very painstakingly long process. So most cases, a larger plastering company completes it. And now you know about those facts. Let's move on to some very significant Parducci's in and near my home state of Michigan. We're going to start with one of Parducci's earliest works. This is a super important construction in the history of Michigan architecture. This goes up in near downtown Detroit, 1920 to 1926. It's still standing. It's a concert hall now. And this is one of the largest Masonic temples in the world. And Parducci does the vast majority of the decoration for the interior here. He doesn't do any of the outside stonework, though, just for the record. If you ever show up in town, the outside's by a bunch of other guys. On the inside, however, Parducci sculpts in a variety of materials in which his sculpture is rendered. We'll start with bronze. This is a floor medallion in the entrance vestibule, and this has been roped off for over a century, and that's why it maintains so much detail there. Also, in the entryway, we have a revolving door with a bronze enclosure, and it incorporates some Masonic symbolism. One of the fellows with the crown up there in the upper right is King Solomon. Also, at the Masonic Temple, the Detroit Masonic Temple, we have works in carved stone and cast stone. Cast stone is something of a misnomer because it's actually more like formed concrete. This is an example right in front of you where you can actually see the trowel marks in the sculpture. So it's actually not really stone, but in the industry, they call it cast stone. Also, we have wood carved based on models by Parducci. The vine with the leaves at the bottom is especially telling. It's exactly in Parducci's wheelhouse style-wise. But most importantly, at the Masonic Temple, we have plaster patterns, and there's probably over 100 individual patterns here. And you can see from this example before you exactly what I'm talking about when I say that Parducci only had to produce a few inches of it, and then another company would come in and they would just duplicate his pattern around the rest of the room until it's finished. And I want you to keep this plaster pattern here in mind because we're going to use it for a comparison a little bit later in my lecture. Now we're going to touch on the four commissions that are enumerated in the 1932 Baton Rouge Times Advocate article in which they credit Rudolph of being involved in these commissions. And this is exactly when Rudolph lives in Detroit. And we're pretty certain that Rudolph was most likely interviewed by a news writer for the Baton Rouge paper at that time, and that this information is absolutely accurate, that he contributed to these commissions while being corporately connected with his brother Corrado. The Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation is built in 1929. Henry Ford's influence on Detroit history is immeasurable. He finances this museum. He considers it, naming it for Thomas Edison, but the name that you see before you is what stands today. The architect Robert O. Derrick enlists the Parducci brothers to create stone models for exterior sculpture and also for interior plaster work. Some really detailed, gorgeous stuff also. And what I love the most about this commission is that the involvement of the Parduccis is confirmed by a source other than the ledgers. The Benson Ford Research Center, right there on site, has an original contract record of the Parducci's contributions to the sculpture embellishments of this museum. And the total cited in this contract record is actually greater than the value reported in the ledgers, which is one of many clues that lead us to believe Parducci created his ledgers towards the tail end of his career from memory and incomplete records. And that's why we occasionally run into discrepancies of this nature. In the suburb of Southfield, it's reported as Detroit in the Baton Rouge paper, but at this point, Southfield is not incorporated as a city. So it's just kind of, this is actually, I think, Royal Oak Township at the time. So it's not really in Detroit, but it's in a suburb that abuts Detroit. It's one of the largest suburbs of Detroit. And this is a seminary. And on campus, they have a chapel, St. Anthony Chapel. It's embellished with Corrado and Rudolph's work. And they have a few adjacent buildings that have some other variety of different styles that they sculpt in here. I'd like you to pay extra close attention to the angels kneeling and facing the shields. This is a theme that Parducci tackles quite a few times over the course of his career, and we're going to see a couple more examples coming up in a bit. A little bit south of Detroit, about 60 miles along US 75 in downtown Toledo, we have a building that's reported in the Baton Rouge Times as the Boody Building, B-O-O-D-Y. And when this actually opened, it was known as the OI Building, or the Owens, Illinois Building. Not sure where the name came from, but it was originally, during the time of its construction, known as the Booty Building because there was a very famous hotel that stood on this site called the Booty House Hotel. And a member of that family also participated in the financing of the building of the skyscraper. So they used that name during construction, and that's why it ends up in the Baton Rouge paper. Here at this location, Rudolph and his brother produce in a cast material, bronze, and they also make what is very typical of their style, exterior carved stone sculpture. And also the architectural firm is a firm that, like most of the architectural firms they work for, they do numerous commissions for over the course of their career. We're now moving back to the city of Detroit. Locally, this is known as Historic Trinity Lutheran Church, another architect for whom Parducci produced numerous commissions over the course of his career, William E.N. Hunter. He actually has a design in my hometown of Traverse City, but it's been altered egregiously, unfortunately. I think you'll agree that the exterior sculpture and the exterior look of this church is pretty stunning, but it's really not compared to the interior, which I think is one of the most beautiful church interiors you'll find in any place in the Detroit metropolis. This building is actually not that large, but the proper massing of elements in the interior give it the appearance of a grandiose cathedral. And Parducci and his brother Rudolph, they render many pieces for the interior. The best look you're going to get in my photos, though, is on the far right photo where you can see some angels flanking the main altar and raritas. Now we're going to move to the west side of Michigan to a really important commission that happens at the peak of the Depression. Parducci states in a 75 interview that he and his brother are among the only laborers at this construction site to get paid in dollars. Most of the general laborers got paid in scrip, which is basically, redeemable at a company store, the contractor's company store, which is not an uncommon thing in the 1930s during the Depression. Well, Parducci and his brother, they are actually asked to come to Grand Rapids to render these clay models for this sculpture in town at the stone yard where they're carved, which is very uncommon. They hardly do this at any point in their careers, but in 1932, people are really looking for work and they agree to it. There's a great story behind that. This building is an old auditorium that's been subject to a lot of alterations, additions, and changes over the years. And slowly, over many years of these changes, the exterior sculpture has been moved to the interior. A good friend of mine here in Detroit by the name of Jeff Morrison, he writes a lot about architectural sculpture in Detroit also. He published a book a few years ago called Guardians of Detroit. And right now he's working on a sequel called Guardians of Michigan. And in the process of his research, he took an interior tour, made a great collection of photographs of the interior work here that he allowed me to share with you tonight. So we thank Jeff Morrison for his use of these photographs. Here we see the typical crouching position that's very common in Parducci and Ricci style. We have a few different artistic disciplines represented here. There's metal casting and that kind of thing on the left. We have stone and marble sculpture, chiseling in the middle. And then we have a printing press with a guy about to put a pile of paper in it there on the right. We also have some fully standing pieces representing different human endeavors, drama, commerce, and sports. And I'd like you to pay special attention to the commerce panel because it is depicted in a 1932 article in the Grand Rapids Press with Corrado's brother, Rudolph, rendering it in clay right there in the stone yard. And again, it's so interesting that so much of Rudolph's career is concentrated in newspaper articles published in 1932. Back to Detroit, another Depression era commission, and this is a really super important one. Another one where Rudolph's involvement is confirmed by reputable newspaper accounts, a Detroit Free Press article from 1932. And the panels you see on the right, it depicts historical scenes from Michigan industry. And there are 8 panels of this size in this theme on the building. It's a really nice federal building. It was built as a post office, but now it's used as a U.S. courthouse right in downtown Detroit. Also, we have a series of cameos that incorporate typical architectural sculpture symbolism that we see in federal constructions in this era of architectural history. All right, this one right here, this is right in my backyard, and I really love living in a neighborhood that has such a significant piece of architecture. I live in Berkeley. It's right across the biggest road in Detroit called Woodward from a town called Royal Oak. This is about a half mile from my place. The most important thing I want to teach you about this location, however, is that the tower that is in front of the main sanctuary, built from 1921 to 29 to 31, it has some really gorgeous sculpture on it, but it's not by Parducci. It's by a more famous architectural sculptor by the name of Rene Paul Chambelin. And I have to point that out so that people don't become misinformed about who did what here. That sculpture of a crucified Christ on the tower in front is the most impressive work here, but it is not by Parducci and his brother. Parducci and his brother contribute mostly in the era of construction here from 1933 to 1935, which is when they build the main church. The most spectacular pieces they execute for the shrine are the Stations of the Cross. And these are some of the most gorgeous Stations of the Cross you'll see anywhere. A docent actually told me that these are insured for over $1 million. And Alan, Corrado Parducci's son, tells us he's the primary source for our claim that Rudolph contributed to this commission. Alan tells us that his father roughed in the subject matter, and that his uncle Rudolph actually executed the fine detail. And we very, very infrequently throughout Corrado's career do we see fully disengaged elements in a relief sculpture like we see here. So that's kind of a clue that backs up Rudolph's involvement. Rudolph, he was a jeweler in his spare time, in his hobby time, and creating jewelry, it commands a really a great command of detailed three-dimensional space. And I think you'll agree that the detail here is just spectacular and probably a little bit more than we would normally see in other relief sculptures by Parducci. My photographs maybe have a little bit too much green in them here. They might require an adjustment, but I feel like I've captured the detail very thoroughly. And I also am always just stricken by how much this guy on the right looks like Hulk Hogan, despite the fact that Hulk Hogan doesn't enter the American consciousness until 1980. And the Parducci's rendered these in the 30s. Looking further inside the sanctuary at National Shrine of the Little Flower, we'll find a variety of saint niches. This one is dedicated to Queen of All Saints, Mother Mary. And in this particular example, the octagonal portal trim we see here is confirmed by scrapbook images. So we definitely know it's by Parducci. But the altar featuring the freestanding statue of Mary and the flanking angels, we do not have scrapbook images. My co-author, Einar, believes these are more likely rendered by Chamberlain. I believe they're more likely rendered by Parducci, and we enjoy having debates like that we never get a conclusion to. On the exterior, we have 4 panels with this exact theme that is most likely cast stone, but might be carved stone. Sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference. And these panels are confirmed by scrapbook images. We also have some very fancy grill work over the windows, and these bear an incredible similarity to the bronze work at the Booty Building, the PNC Bank Building in Toledo. And because they bear such a similarity to other important Parducci works of the era, without scrapbook images to confirm it, we believe these are also by the Parducci brothers. That does it for Michigan. Let's talk about Louisiana now. And the connection is pretty solid. We're going to start, we're going to do this chronologically, and we're going to start in New Orleans, where Rudolph moved circa 1924. This home, separated into apartments at 94 Fontainebleau, is not that historic as far as sculpture goes. I just love this photograph, and I like to show it off. This is where Rudolph lived with his wife, Deborah, through most of his experience in New Orleans. The New Orleans States Item article from 1979 that is more about Lequien than it is Parducci states that Parducci assisted John Marion Lequien Sr. in the execution of the plasterwork at the Sanger Theater on Canal Street, just north of the French Quarter in New Orleans. Before I ever knew about Rudolph's involvement here, I went to see a concert here in 2018, Harry Shearer performing as one of the members of Spinal Tap. And I snapped a few snapshots with my handheld camera, not my pro camera. They turned out all right. But I just feel really fortunate that I took the time to make these pictures, because I found out later Rudolph was involved. And this is really great stuff. You'll see that it's not one of my pro shots. It's not as good as my normal photography, but that is because I shot it with a cheap camera in low light. But it's good enough to see that they're awesome renderers of a architectural plaster here. And we also are offered a great opportunity at this location to compare Rudolph's work, and his boss, of course, from the exact same era as Parducci. If we look closely at the upper right of the Sanger Theater photo, we'll see a course of aspen leaves and vines that are separated by flourishes that look like possibly a dandelion. And then if we look at the top and bottom courses on the Corrado work from the Detroit Masonic Temple, we'll see a very similar pattern with aspen leaves and little flourishes between them, and a vine there, an undulating vine. And this is just an uncanny example, and really shows you how the two different parties that executed these works, they definitely came from a similar background as far as where they learned how to do this kind of thing. Let's move on to Covington, Louisiana now, on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain. We have St. Peter Catholic Church. This is specifically referred to in Parducci's ledgers. He writes St. Peter's statue, which makes it pretty incontrovertible. We can also attribute the flourishes and vine work above St. Peter's head to Parducci. And let's keep in mind the architects here, Wogan and Bernard, because we're going to see that partnership a couple more times. We are now moving into the city limits of New Orleans. Again, another Wogan and Bernard design. This is an addition to Jesuit High School, built in 1953. Parducci is enlisted to produce sculpture for the tympanum. and he produces a work that includes 3 Jesuit missionaries. I believe that at least a couple of them, if not all of them, were martyred, but I'm not, the backstory on the Jesuit missionaries, I'm not that clear on. I definitely know they're Jesuit missionaries, though. Also on the facade of this building, we get some papal insignia and some foliage and vine work. And inside, we have another bronze medallion on the floor, which, based on the great condition it's in, I would say the students of this school attempt to avoid walking on it. Because normally when you have a floor medallion like this, it's been there for years, you see a lot of fading of the detail. Just speculating, though, I don't have any proof of that. So now we've made it to the Louisiana State Capitol, which I'm sure you all know is one of the most interesting and architecturally fantastic state capitals in the United States. It's one of only 2 skyscraper capitals. Interestingly, the other skyscraper capital in Lincoln, Nebraska, it is most of its exterior and interior sculpture is by lligh, who also contributes to the Louisiana State Capitol. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a second, but let's talk about the Parducci brothers' contributions first. Rudolph's contributions are very thoroughly documented in the Baton Rouge Times Advocate articles of the day, as are almost every other contribution by other sculptors that are figural and anatomical. And the 6 historical figures of Louisiana history are enumerated in this article. I only have shots of 4 of them, though. These are all sculpted in tandem with Parducci's boss at the time, John Marion Lakeen Sr. And this Jackson on the far right is, of course, Andrew Jackson. And let's keep in mind the names of the architects, Weiss, Dreyfus, and Seaforth. We'll touch on them again in a second. Also, the 1979 New Orleans item article notes that Lakeen contributed greatly to the interior decoration of the Senate chamber. And since Parducci was working for him at the time that the designs were likely rendered, I think there's a good chance that Parducci may have contributed to this room also. The newspaper article, however, does not give specifics, so there's a lot to speculate on what might have been their contribution in this room. We have cast iron railing there. We've got column capitals that are carved in marble. We've got a coffered ceiling that's most likely rendered in plaster. So it's really fun to speculate, but can't say for sure what exact pieces of ornamentation here were put together by Lakeen. Let's talk about Corrado's contribution now. Corrado is not mentioned in any of the newspaper articles of the day that, as I've said before, are extremely thorough. And Corrado has a $9,000 entry in 1930 for his work here, which is an incredibly substantial amount. Rudolph probably helped him execute what he did do here. But since he's not covered in the paper, one wonders, what exactly did Parducci do at this site? Well, pretty much all the figural work in the entire Capitol is accounted for. What's not accounted for is the ornamental work. And when you walk around the Capitol and you find pieces of ornamental sculpture that are not attributed to a specific sculptor in the newspaper accounts of the day, well, we jump to the reasonable conclusion that it was probably rendered by Parducci, especially when it's exactly in its stylistic wheelhouse, like these 2 pieces seen here, that definitely look like something Parducci could produce. In addition to the ledger entry evidence, we also have a wonderful letter of recommendation taken from Parducci's scrapbook from Albert Kahn, Detroit's most prolific architect at the time, to the architects of the Capitol, Weiss, Dreyfus, and Seaforth. And you'll note in the text that it states specifically that Parducci is submitting a bid for the ornamental modeling of the new Louisiana State Capitol. He does not say anything about figurative or figural or anatomical modeling. So this is another clue leading us to believe that Corrado contributed mostly to the trim. I also love pointing out the closing of this letter. Albert Kahn signs it as if he is concerned that Parducci will be hired away from him. I cannot recommend him too highly. A double-edged statement if I've ever read one. So Parducci, Rudolph, and Corrado, their involvement in the Capitol sculpture, it gives us a great opportunity to consider other sculptors that contributed, because at this point in American history, the monumental and architectural sculpture community is very tight-knit. A ton of them know each other. They share educational backgrounds. They have commissions at the same sites. There's all kinds of interesting interconnections that we can look at. And since the sculpture at the Capitol is so sumptuous and awesome, I thought I'd take an opportunity to talk about the 4 most important sculptors that have work on the Capitol. We're going to start with Lorado Taft. He sculpted the monumental pieces that flank the main entrance doorway on the far left and far right as you go up the grand staircase. On the right, this piece celebrates immigrants coming to America, looking for a better life. I'm less familiar with the subject matter on the left side, but I think you'll agree that it's a beautifully rendered piece. So what might Taft have in common with Parducci? Well, Taft was a lecturer and modeling instructor at the Art Institute of Chicago for over 30 years. And his tenure there, it overlaps with Alvin Polasek, Parducci's earliest instructor from the age of 8 years old, who was teaching him sculpture at a settlement house in Manhattan. And we can see from the Chicago Tribune articles from the 1910s and 1920s that Taft and Polasek work in such close proximity to each other that they're frequently mentioned in the exact same articles in the paper. Despite this proximity, they do not collaborate once in their career that I can find of, but I still think it's really interesting, this connection we can make to Parducci. Next, we're going to move on to Ulric Ellerhusen. And Ulric, he modeled the really epic angels up between the 22nd and 25th floor. This is probably my favorite work at the Louisiana Capitol. They're so grandiose. They're so beautifully rendered in this angular style. And I'm crazy about these cherubs and infants at the base of the angels who appear to have been working out quite a bit. They're quite muscular for babies. Well, Ellerhusen, he also studied at the Art Students League of Manhattan, just like Parducci, and he started under Taft at the Art Institute of Chicago, where we've already established a connection to Parducci. Well, also worth noting is that in the Baton Rouge State Times Morning Advocate article from 1932, his work at Christ Church of Cranbrook, Michigan, is deemed important enough to mention. Well, Christ Church is financed by a guy named George Gow Booth, and George Gow Booth is the owner of the Detroit News and a ton of other newspapers. He's kind of like the William Randolph Hearst of Detroit at this point. And in 1925, his father passes away, and he hires Albert Kahn to design a headstone for his gravesite, and Albert Kahn subcontracts the job to Parducci, who produces the trim on these headstones. This is in Birmingham, Michigan, just right down the street from Cranbrook. So this is an example of Ellerhusen and Parducci having a similar client. We can take that example even a little bit further with Laurie, who we'll get to in a second. But first, let's touch on Weinman. Weinman is by far the most famous of the sculptors that have work applied to the Louisiana State Capitol. He has friezes in this style on the left and right of the grand main entrance to the Capitol. And why do I say that he's the most famous and most successful? Well, I believe that a sculptor's success is gauged by how many people see their work. And when you design the Liberty Head Mercury dime, your work is seen by over 100 million people within your lifetime, which is incredibly successful for an artist. And not only that, if you look closely on the Liberty Head side of the coin between 1937 and the Y, you'll see a little emblem there. That's actually Adolph Weinman's monogram. And when you get to put your signature on a piece of US coinage, well, you're among some of the most successful artists in the history of the world, in my personal opinion. What is Weinman's connection to Parducci? I'm going to save that for the end. It's a really, really big and important, great one. I'm going to save it for just a little bit when we get out of town. The last sculptor I want to touch on at the Capitol is Laurie. He does the frame around the main entrance door there, and it's really just a phenomenal piece. And he also studied under Taft at the Art Institute of Chicago. His work at Christ Church, Cranbrook in Michigan is also worth a mention in the Baton Rouge State Times article. But not only that, just down the street from Cranbrook in my neck of the woods, there's a church, a Presbyterian church, that features sculpture by both Parducci and Laurie in and on the same building. The figure represented on the right by Parducci is a very famous architect from Detroit by the name of Wirt Rowland. And he is basically Albert Kahn's right-hand man from 1917 to 1922. And then Albert Schweitzer, the famous theologian and organ player, is depicted by Laurie's grillwork sculpture on the left. More spectacular than any of that, though, is the fact that in 1941, Corrado Parducci produces in Detroit for the Sandys Canada Company offices and plant a tribute to Lee Laurie's work at the Louisiana State Capitol that many untrained eyes might look at and say, hey, Corrado, he ripped him off. But tributes to other sculptors is a very, very common thing in this era, and that's definitely what this is. It is not a blatant ripoff as much as Parducci expressing his respect for Laurie's work. So you might think that that's all we have to cover for the Parduccis in Louisiana, but wait, there is more. In the 1975 interview, Parducci specifically speaks to his experiences in Louisiana, and he states to the interview, during the 30s, I had the Federal Building. We covered that. I had Coughlin Shrine. That's the National Shrine of the Little Flower in Royal Oak. I had Louisiana. There was some work I did on the Louisiana State Capitol for Huey Long and other out-of-town work. Well, this statement, I had Louisiana, my co-author and I, we have always believed that this implies that there is more work in Louisiana by Parducci than the ledgers reveal. And we've looked really hard for other places that might fit the bill. And I got just a couple examples I want to share here with you. The first one is in New Orleans. You'll note that the architects are Wogan and Bernard, who Parducci has worked for at least 2 other occasions over the course of his career. This would actually be the first time. But more than being connected to the architects, also there's a ledger entry in 1931 that says St. Joseph Catholic Church, New Orleans, 1931. Well, we have closely examined St. Joseph's, and we have looked at the additions that were made at the church in 1931, and they really do not show off Parducci's signature style. I personally believe that Parducci, making these ledgers from imperfect memories and records, he mislabeled the church for this 1931 entry. And I think when you take a look at some of the similarities we see in design here, that you may agree with me. First of all, let's look at the keystone at the very top of the arch here that includes a fish, which is a reference to Christianity and the feeding of the 5,000. Quite obviously, they're rendered in similar fashion. But also we have in both designs the images of symmetrical birds facing each other, which we will see repeated many times over the course of Parducci's career. Looking even more closely at another comparison, we can see that the keystone at the top of the arch, the fish there, is rendered in an incredibly similar fashion to sculpture Parducci produces for Redford Presbyterian Church in Detroit in the mid-50s. The scales, the fins, the mouth, the face, it's all very, very uncannily similar. And if you're not convinced yet, well, here's a work by Parducci in Detroit on the right in 1925 that bears a great similarity to the arrangement of the arch and the columns here. If we look at the outside ring of the arch, we'll see that it's finished in a foliage flourish that folds inward at the top, as well as the pedestal on which the lion is standing. It's triplicated on Our Lady of the Star of the Sea, but both of them feature a foliage pattern that is folded out towards the top, and they both also have column capitals that are finished off with a flower square in the middle. Again, these are uncanny similarities. Last similarity I'll show you for Our Lady Star of the Sea is to St. Cecilia Catholic Church in Detroit, built 1929 to 1930. Let's look at the way the corners of the column capitals are folded up like a scroll, almost exactly the same. We also have string courses, double string course on the right, triple string course on the left at the tops of the column capitals. More uncanny similarities in terms of style. One other possibility that I want to throw at you guys is in Jefferson. This is right next to New Orleans. And this is a church that goes up in the 50s. And one of the architects, of the co-architects, is John Marion Lakeen Jr. This is the son of John Marion Lakeen Sr., who sculpted in tandem with Rudolph the historical Louisiana figures on the Capitol. So lligh Jr. definitely knows of the Parduccis, but lligh Jr. also has a bunch of people in his family that are still executing architectural sculpture at this point. So there's actually a bigger, better argument for a lligh being involved here. But I think when you look at some of the similarities that you will not be able to deny, that if lligh rendered it, he was very highly influenced by Parducci during the 5 years that Parducci spent with him in the 20s. Here we have the rectory right next door. And if we look at the details on these peacocks, they're rendered almost in exactly the same fashion. I'm not sure what that thing on the head is there, but that's exactly the same. We have a 3-feather arrangement on the right, a 4-feather arrangement on the left. Perhaps the rendering on the left is less busy, maybe more streamlined. So maybe there's another one that looks even more like it. Oh, there is. St. Michael the Archangel, Catholic Church in Muskegon, Michigan, built in 1942. We're not positive McGrath and Dome and other architects here, but we're pretty sure. In any case, we have another peacock rendering that's, you know, not identical, but extremely similar to what we're seeing at St. Agnes. The parochial school right next door, built approximately 1950. We see the kneeling angels facing each other again. Compare it to All Saints Episcopal Church in Detroit, Michigan, William Ian Hunter again. Note the fashioning of the legs in the foreground and how they're bent. And also note the hairdo. More uncanny similarities that convince us that if a Parducci was not involved here, someone with an extremely similar background in architectural sculpture was. This is the last comparison I'll throw at you. Also at the parochial school, you'll see that the bishop's headgear is almost identical, as are the sashes, or I'm not sure what the word is for those things at the top right and left of the shield, but they are also rendered in extremely similar fashion. And the outer ring of foliage on the St. Agnes School cameo is also exactly in Parducci's wheelhouse. That finishes off the Parducci experience in New Orleans. I want to touch on just a few others that are outside of both Michigan, the Midwest, and not outside the Midwest. There's a Chicago in here, but I'm going to touch on them really quickly. I think I'm getting close to running out of time here. This is an apprenticeship era work of Corrado's in California. This is his only work that's west of the Rockies, west of the Continental Divide. And his involvement here is confirmed by his son, Alan, who moved out to California in the 1940s for college. And when he got out there, his dad told him, hey, Alan, you can go see some of my work on the Huntington Library. Not only that, Parducci mentions in a 1979 interview with independent researcher Fay Henry that he created colophons for the Huntington Library doors. Colophons is kind of an old word for, you know, a printer's trademark. And back in the day when printing first started, a printer would take an entire page to put their corporate logo. And we can see here from Parducci's work on the left that it is absolutely based on an image found in Doctor and Student, published by Robert Wyer in London in 1530 AD. The doors that are made for the Huntington Library are recast in the mid-20s for an important bank in downtown Marquette, Michigan, another town experiencing a huge building boom in the mid-20s. And now we come to the piece that you've seen behind me the whole time I've been talking today. This is probably my favorite Parducci anywhere. It's an incredibly elaborate piece that he produces during his apprenticeship years. And apprenticeship era commissions can be very, very difficult to prove. So how do we know that Parducci actually executed this work that was contracted to Anthony DiLorenzo? Well, Parducci takes credit for it in his scrapbook. And if you look closely, you'll note that the caption on top, it tells you the spandrel figures are by Adolph Weinman. And this is our huge connection to Weinman that I was alluding to earlier in the lecture. Both Parducci and Weinman have epic work on this building, some of the best stuff of their career. And despite the fact that it's contracted to DiLorenzo, when Parducci makes a claim of authorship in his interviews or in his scrapbook, we take him at his word. We also have to keep in mind, again, that DiLorenzo is an ornamentalist, and actually rendering the stone and bronze pieces here is probably outside his field of abilities. So it makes natural sense that he would have delegated it to Parducci. Here's a closer look at Adolph Weinman's work on one of the spandrels. He repeats this sculpture 3 times, but with different things in the hands of the subjects. And I think you'll agree that stylistically, it's very similar to what you see on the the Louisiana state capitol. And then we also have newspaper references to Weinman's involvement from the Davenport Daily Times in 1924. Remember, Weinman is a very famous sculptor at this point. His name is very well known. And this is exactly when the Mercury head dime is the main dime in circulation in Americans' pockets. Another article from the Davenport Daily Times, December 10th, 1924, tells us the contractors involved in this building. And we see that Weinman has a contract. We see that DiLorenzo has a contract. And we also see a third company, John Polachek's. And this is a casting company that actually casts the bronze work. So sometimes you'll see somebody attribute this work to Polachek, and they're not wrong. Polachek Company did cast it, but they made the casting based on models created by Corrado Parducci while in the employ of Anthony DiLorenzo. And I just have a ton of pictures of this place. I have visited it twice to make photographs. Again, it is my favorite Parducci out there, so that's why I've spared no expense to get out there to photograph it a few times. If you look closely at the subject matter, you'll see here the smelting of metals, the minting of coins, the trading at the market. The handful of architectural historians who study this piece refer to it as the history of money. Here are some of the stone reveal pieces. These are human endeavors that are personified. I'll show you a better example in just a second here, but I think you'll agree with me that the subject matter here is just rendered exquisitely. Super fine detail. What you would expect from a 24-year-old young man trying to impress the other people in his industry and set up a career for himself. This is labor personified in a stone carving. We're going to move on to Chicago now. This is a very early Parducci work, and the earlier it is, the more important it is. We're very fortunate to have a building by Albert Kahn in the Loop in Chicago. Chicago has its own roster of legendary architects, and it's pretty rare for them to bring an out-of-towner in this era to to design a building. Also, a very interesting historical fact about this location. The parents of Leopold and Loeb, the famous murderers, were members at this club during the time of its construction. And in the 1975 interview, Parducci states that the construction was slowed down because of the legal entanglements. For those of you who don't know, Leopold and Loeb are a couple very famous murderers who in the 1920s attempted to commit the perfect crime, and they were caught. This is another example of just absolutely sumptuous early work by Parducci. This club has existed for over 100 years, but it was recently dissolved, leaving the building's future in jeopardy. And that illustrates one of the reasons I do this work. If the architectural sculpture is shaved off or if the building is demolished, well, then the record of what happened here is held by photographers such as myself. And this is really typical of the subject matter you'll see for an architectural sculptor at this point in American history, just beautifully rendered. Let's look at just a couple pieces by Rudolph in California after he leaves Detroit. His first evidence of his life in California is a 1941 piece of carved mahogany above a door at a post office in Gardena, California. If you go out to Gardena to find this, keep in mind they have 2 post offices and make sure you're headed to the right one. This is the only evidence we have of a Rudolph or Corrado being involved in the Federal Arts Project of the Works Project Administration. Later in his life in California, Rudolph gets involved in sculpting for quite a few heavy hitters in the Hollywood scene. On the left, you'll see him in a studio creating set pieces for Creature from the Black Lagoon. Rudolph is the guy right in the center with the white pants, black t-shirt, and glasses. And then on the left, you see him creating the models for the Dumbo ride at Disneyland. And in my mind, this also, like Weinman, makes Rudolph just an incredibly successful sculptor in the sense that probably in the hundreds of millions of people at this point have seen these Dumbo models at Disneyland. And the current ride, it is still based on the models that Parducci produced in the 1950s. The last applied pieces I want to tell you about are at the New York State Capitol in Albany. This building is built in the 1880s. It's designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, who might be the most famous architect in American history, except for maybe Frank Lloyd Wright. And he's pretty much the godfather of American architecture. Stanford White is the White in McKim, Mead and White, an incredibly influential New York firm of the time. And he is assigned the task of creating the Senate chamber. In his 1975 interview, Parducci states that Stanford White left the mantles uncarved, as if it was an accident of some sort. In 1970s, the acting architects of the New York State Capitol at the time, they decide they want to have these lintels and mantles carved, and they hire Parducci to do it. And this is kind of full circle for Parducci, because Stanford White is one of the most important people when it comes to bringing architectural sculpture to the United States from Europe. And Stanford White is an educator of the Ricci family in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And the Riccis, they spawn Ulysses, who ends up being Parducci's first master. So if you look closely at this foliage design here, you'll see that there's a name carved into it, and the name is not Parducci's, it's lligh, and it says 1981 AD. Parducci actually executed these models in the late 70s, but in this era of American history, stone carvers are becoming much, much more rare, and people that are capable of doing the job correctly are able to demand more recognition in their contracts. And we theorized that Lligh insisted he'd be allowed to chisel his name here, which might lead some to believe that he came up with the original designs. Well, we know he didn't. And how do we know? Because we have images of Parducci creating the exact design in his studio in the 1970s. You'll note that the figure shown in the cameo is different, but that's because the acting architects of the Capitol at this time, they wanted to switch up the cameos from pattern to pattern. But the work is most definitely Parducci's. The last group of sculptures I want to show you are owned by Alan Parducci, and they are in his living room in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood of Los Angeles. This is stuff that Parducci did in his personal time, which makes it very interesting because he chiseled it with his own hand, which was a very uncommon thing. He carved it with his own hand. Also, on the far right, we see a style that Parducci never touches on once before or after in his entire career, which makes the mother and child figure there exceptionally interesting. This is myself and Alan. Alan is 94 this year. He's still very sharp. He has a ton of really great recollections of his father. I spent a day with him in Los Angeles in 2019, just before I published, and we visited his father's work at the Huntington Library in San Marino, and the staff knew him, and they knew of Parducci's work there, and they pretty much treated him and I like a king the whole time we were there. It was a wonderful day. Last couple pieces in in Alan's living room. He also has a sculpture of himself and his mother, probably rendered around 1932. That's in plaster. And then on the right, you see a series of maquettes, which are basically models that an architectural sculptor produces for their client to give them an idea of what the larger sculpture will look like. These are between 6 and 10 inches tall, just for the record. Very last piece is a Christmas card from the Parduccis, 1952. For quite a few decades, Parducci would produce a custom Christmas card for a small group of family and friends. Alan tells us that he was frequently recruited to produce these Christmas cards, and he hated it, which I thought was hilarious. And he also said that these Christmas cards were usually ready around the February following the holiday. So that's my presentation, folks. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really appreciate your attention. If you come to Detroit, my book is available at a couple locations. But being as you are in Louisiana, I imagine most of you would probably go to Amazon first. And if you just put in my name and Corrado Parducci, you will most definitely find my book as the first result. Also, if you would like to learn more about Parducci, I love sharing his archive with other people. The more eyes we get on the ledger, the greater the chances are that we find additional Parduccis that have not been discovered as Parduccis just yet. So thanks so much for your time, folks. I'm ready for a Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Okay, questions? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you...
Can you hear, Dale?
I can. Speak up, though.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I was born in the 40s. saw the sculpture of the bears holding the fountain in Detroit Zoo.
Yes.
And yeah, and that seems like it's like an animal, but 3D. Did he ever do that ever anywhere else? I couldn't see it in your.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Parducci actually speaks to this commission in his 1975 interview. And for those of you who don't know, Detroit has a pretty world famous zoo. It's actually located outside of the city limits of Detroit, but it is referred to as the Detroit Zoo. It's in Huntington Woods, right near where I live. And Parducci produced some standing bears for a fountain there in metal, and they hold the fountain up, and they have water cascading all over them. And there's some of Parducci's most famous local work because the zoo is so famous that over a million people have seen these. I mean, I'm speaking with somebody from Louisiana right now who's familiar with them. So that's how famous they are. Well, in his 1975 interview, Parducci specifically states, I did this project against my will. He did not like the bear setup. And, he's the kind of sculptor that when he's given an assignment, he executes it, but he specifically states he didn't like it. Were Parducci with us today, I believe that he might have a softer tone about it because these bears have become so endeared to the Detroit community. Almost any child growing up around Detroit in the era you speak of, they saw these bears at some time or another, and they really stand out in people's memories. They're really treasured. And I think the community definitely holds them in higher regard than Corrado may have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a gentleman who wants to share something with you.
Sure.
I am excited about this topic on Parducci. I have the oldest firm in Baton Rouge. My founding partner, Ralph Bottom, he's late Ralph Bottom. Before he founded my firm, he was working for Weiss, Dreyfus, and Civic. Ralph Bottom was the field architect for the state capitol in around the 1930s. So I feel that Ralph Bottom would have worked with or collaborated as the state capitol was being built at the time.
An associate architect working with Weiss, Dreyfus, and Seaforth, or as a sculptor?
Cycle as an architect in that firm, and he was the field architect doing construction. But he left, and then he founded my firm back in 1904 or 5.
Gotcha. Well, I'm always interested in learning more about Louisiana firms. Detroit is my specialty, but New Orleans is a very close second, and I travel up and down the River Road a lot. So Baton Rouge, I have my greatest interest in Baton Rouge architecture is without question the capital, but also, the River Road and the Mississippi River, they illustrate this connection between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And I spend about a month in New Orleans almost every year. And I never go that whole month without going to the capital at least once. But because of that, New Orleans and Louisiana, they're just a tiny bit below Detroit in terms of what my main interest in architectural history is. So I appreciate the additional information there.
All right, any other questions? All right, Dale, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Melissa. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for the attention of your audience. When I get to my stained glass book out, maybe I'll holler at you again.
Yeah, definitely. I'll shoot you an email tomorrow, okay?
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so
much.
much.
All right, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.